Everyone, thanks. First of all, my apologies for being late. The JNU bus came before my car did, so my apologies. In fact, today is going to be, I think, probably the most intense day of all, because we're going to do, because we decided to, reduce it by one, take away one session at the end because of your. To accommodate not just your departure schedules, but your sightseeing desires as well. In order to accommodate that, we're going to have one less module, which meant that some other modules have to be compressed. And today we're going to do agriculture in the morning, manufacturing, services, urbanization, international trade, internal trade, migration. Well, let's see how much we get through. But I think we have a lot to cover. But I guess that given that everyone is dying to know about loan waivers and all of that, today's session should be a bit on the lively side. And I hope the pen is in right mode. Excellent, yeah? Okay, let's start. It's a long thing to cover. So the question is, why does agriculture matter? Okay, first of all, let me say that when my memories of learning all these subjects when I was an undergraduate student are not very pleasant. The reason is, I think there's something intrinsically about the subject matter that can be dry, right? So if you do agriculture, it grew at X% this year, rice went up so much, wheat went up so much, this came down this much. I mean, in 5 minutes, you've lost the audience, you've lost the students, it becomes a really boring subject. So the pedagogical challenge is, how do we make something like this come alive? And here I would suggest a little bit in terms of making it come alive, in terms of a theme. So the theme I'm going to use to make the subject try and make it come alive is a slightly, it's a theme of a lecture that I recently gave, is, do we need to love some agriculture rest and the rest more? So we want to cover the same content. I want to cover the same content, but through this prism of, look, if we step back from agriculture, is it possible that the problem in agriculture is that we love some agriculture too much and we don't love the other agriculture enough? So what do we mean by this will come out as we go along. But this is a kind of analytical framing for trying to teach all the things that we need to teach. I mean, we can't get away from saying, wheat went up, rice went down, milk went up, dairy came down. But how do we do it in a way that's kind of exciting, right? Or at least interesting. So first, why does agriculture matter? We know the reasons. 49% of the labor force is in agriculture. If you look at some NSS studies, what is agriculture is no longer the same. I think a very interesting exercise for students would be to see, what do the different data sources say on what is agriculture? Especially now with, the cities becoming bigger and encompassing more agricultural areas, it's not an obvious question how many people derive their income from agriculture per se, how much they derive from agriculture and related activities, so on and so forth. But for the sake of, I think there's an NSS survey that says 37 out of 54 households derive. So the number is not the same across things, which is worth checking. Of course, 80% of India's poor are rural. Food security is very important. So these are what I call intrinsic reasons why agriculture matters in itself. But agriculture also matters for other reasons, what we call instrumental reasons, not for itself, but for what else it can do or not do. It affects inflation and hence overall growth. For example, if inflation is high, the RBI will say we need to, the MPC will say, we have to raise interest rates. That could affect overall growth. As we've seen from the fertilizer sector, it affects the functioning of a number of markets for good and for bad. It can also determine whether urbanization is, you get good urbanization or bad urbanization. And as we see today, and as we've seen periodically in India, it can be a source of social stress. And that can have wider ramifications for Indian economics and Indian politics as well. So agriculture matters, it matters a lot, but it matters both for intrinsic and for extrinsic reasons. But here, I want to say something, a kind of irony and a paradox which we have to be really clear about. And to do this, I'm going to, for once, read out what I said in my speech a few weeks ago. But when we say we care about agriculture, we must be acutely aware of this almost an irony. And what is that irony? The Nobel Prize winner, Sir Arthur Lewis, showed that economic development is always and everywhere about getting people out of agriculture and of agriculture becoming less important part of the economy, not in absolute terms, but certainly as a share of GDP and as a share of employment. But this must happen along with rapid productivity growth, ensuring rising farm incomes and adequate food supplies for the people. The reason why agriculture cannot be the dominant source of livelihood is that levels of productivity, which finally determine standards of living and wages, and hence living standards, can never approach and have historically never approached those in manufacturing and services. That, of course, means we must get our industrialization and urbanization right for the alternatives to agriculture to become meaningful, prosperous alternatives. Now, so that's what Arthur Lewis said. Everywhere and always, agriculture is important because agriculture, we need to get more people out of agriculture, and we need to do that, and that's the reason we should focus on this. So, Dr. Ambedkar famously said that the village is a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism. When he said this, he was perhaps onto a deeper truth, what I call the Indian social complement to Arthur Lewis's great economic insight, that in the long run, for Indian reasons, not just for economic growth reasons, people need to move and be moved out of agriculture. Dr. Ambedkar was warning about the patronization of agriculture masquerading as a romanticization of rural India. So the irony is this: we must care deeply about farmers and agriculture today because we want there to be fewer but more productive and prosperous farms and farmers tomorrow. So that's the irony. We care about this not because we want to perpetuate agriculture, but because we want to have less agriculture but more productive agriculture. So that's a thought to keep in mind. And here's a chart to show that. You see here on this chart all the countries put together. The red is the employment share in agriculture. The blue is the GDP share of agriculture, and this is just the difference. So essentially what you see, and this is for 86 countries, essentially what you take away is that employment share declines much more rapidly than agricultural share, so that productivity basically rises over time. And you see what's happening in India. And in a sense, that chart on the right is kind of a lens through which one can see what's happening today and what's been happening for some time. Is that in India, the employment share is declining, the GDP share is declining, but productivity is not increasing. You see that the pattern here of going up. In India, it's the other way around. So in some ways, therefore, the Indian long-run challenge is how do we get agricultural productivity so that we get good structural transformation consistent with what has happened historically. Now this is why agriculture matters. We find that in the period that agriculture grew most rapidly, which is this period, that's when we saw poverty reduction also. This is just to illustrate the point that agriculture matters. Now, just to give you a snapshot of, and this chart came as a bit of a surprise to me. What has been long-term trends in agricultural growth in India? Before the Green Revolution, we were 2% growth, and that's the time we used to have, periodic food shortages. So, for example, this thing here is one of our really darker episodes in our Indian economic history. We had 2 successive famines, and we were dependent on the United States for food aid, and all kinds of things happened. I think then afterwards we had to have a big devaluation of the rupee. So those were pretty, unsettling economic circumstances. Then we had the Green Revolution, and notice that basically agricultural growth picks up by about 1%. Then you focus on other crops. The average growth there,
which is not visible for some reason, is how much?
It's roughly 2.9.
It's roughly 2.9. And then what happens is that for a brief period in the 2000s, agriculture goes up, and now we're back to probably 2.5% agricultural growth. So the takeaway from this for me is that, one, the Green Revolution actually did raise agricultural growth, but over the long sweep of history, our rate of agricultural growth has not been too rapid. I mean, I'm going to show you a chart from China. You will see, and you will see why. So it's a story of some success, but not huge success in India. Now, okay, so let me go through what the successes I think in India have been. I think the big success was the Green Revolution. From food grain shortages and import reliance, we got security, and this is the kind of up and down business that we have to do in every course. You see there's data here. Wheat, huge increase from 1950, whatever, 12, 13-fold increase in production. Similarly, rice, 5-fold increase in production. Pulses, less so. You see that it goes from 8.5 to 17, and we're going to talk about pulses in greater detail. And then, of course, we had the milk revolution. So you can see straight away that we've had big success in wheat and rice, some in milk, but virtually nothing at all in pulses. Now, so I would say the big successes are the Green Revolution. And remember, the Green Revolution success historically was a combination of two things. Norman Borlaug and others discovered these strains of wheat, these high-yielding strains. And those were developed, adapted, everything by a lot of Indian scientists, did a lot of very good work to adapt that to Indian circumstances. And you had to have good Indian institutions for the adaptation, for extension, for teaching. So it was a huge success in India, of Indian agriculture, that managed that Green Revolution happened. Then we had the White Revolution, of course, which is the Verghese Kurian-led dairy revolution in India. As an aside, let me tell you one really interesting fact. I have, my views on foreign aid, and one of the more, unsatisfactory episodes of foreign aid throughout has been how donors have basically used their excess food stocks to dump it in developing countries, which has, of course, impeded the development of local agriculture, because when you get a lot of imports, you don't grow a lot domestically. In the case of food, actually, it is very interesting. Exactly the opposite happened. In fact, we were getting a lot of food in dairy. We were getting a lot of milk powder, which was given as aid by the Europeans. I think what Dr. Kurian did was to take advantage of that, use the resources he generated from that, and convert it into what then became the big Amul NDDB dairy revolution. So it was a case where actually foreign aid was in fact used very cleverly, unlike the previous history on foreign aid. So it's a very interesting, I think, exception to the rule that agricultural food aid especially actually does impedes the development of agriculture in developing countries. So we've had a Green Revolution, we've had a White Revolution, and then you saw the fourth thing where it says average growth is 4.03. In fact, it turns out that that was the period when agriculture grew the strongest in India. Now, here I want to now do a detour into pedagogy. And I think this is, again, a way of making things come alive. I don't know, can I go to the link, couple? So here's what, I would use agriculture to teach, let's say, demand and supply, let's say. So if you think about what has happened in the last 7-8 years, I would use these charts to teach them both agriculture and basic demand and supply. Essentially, what happened in the boom that you saw, the 4%, there was a boom in world agriculture. So essentially what happened, this is my favorite diagram, this is world price. Oh, okay, now we're back to go to, sorry, a couple, can you go back to, yeah. So this is world price, this is demand, this is supply. Essentially what happens is that world prices go up, and then you see what happens is two things happen. Domestic production goes up and the prices received by farmers go up. So farmers experience a double whammy, positive. More production and higher prices. So this is a world demand shock that increases output and increases prices. Then we had two successive droughts here in 2013-14 and 2014-15. Let's call these the drought years. Here what happens, of course, is supply shifts up, right? It's a supply shock, and so what you get less quantity but higher prices. And now what's happening in last year and likely this year, so in the drought you had a negative supply shock, now we have a positive supply shock, and now quantities go up but prices come down. So even in the last 7, 8 years, agriculture is, in one case, demand shock, output and price move in the same direction. Supply shock, in one side, output and prices move in the opposite direction, but one is a negative supply shock and one is a positive supply shock. And to some extent, this kind of helps you understand one thing. In the two supply shock cases, we know that agricultural incomes are not doing as well as when we had a demand shock, because here prices go up, and quantities go up. Unambiguously, rural incomes go up. Here, it's much more tricky. And so I think that this is a way of kind of using pedagogically how to teach agriculture that can bring in agriculture but also bring in basic demand and supply. Now go back to our successes.
Can I say something?
Yeah, not too much.
I'll say only one thing.
Yeah, one thing. Mic, into the mic, please.
If you see the figures, last figure you saw, on the supply shock.
Yeah.
I think it's because of this reason the supply has increased in the previous year. Next year,
again, it will happen.
No, sir. Because there was supply shocks, the lesser supply increased the price. Next year, the farmer had the incentive.
Very good point. I'm going to come to that in just a second. It's a very good point. Hold that thought. This is a very, very good point I'm going to come to, that although this year, we had output going up and prices coming down, next year, let's see what happens. Very, very good point. You see, in fact, can we go back to that? You could argue that because of what he just said, next year, the supply curve could go upwards, precisely because this year it went down and these things happened. Okay, let's see. So, but we'll come back. This is exactly what I want to say when we come to pulses, especially in the case of pulses. Remember here that the other thing I wanted you to focus on in those charts, that one way to think about agriculture is, sorry, and can we go back to the chart, Kapil, sorry. And this is a very important, again, both an analytical and a pedagogical device that I think you should instill in your students, that we have two kinds of agriculture. And again, sir, please hold me thing. I'm going to say extreme just in order to give you the thing. Of course, it's a mixture of the two, but analytically, there are two kinds of agriculture in India. One is tradable commodities, cereals. The other is non-tradables. That is, it's completely, prices are determined by domestic demand and supply, and in that I would put in certainly fruits and vegetables and so on, but I would also put some kind of pulses in that category. Onion, all the vegetables, fruits, all of that in that category. In this category, I'd put cereals, I'd put livestock, and maybe something. So the thing, therefore, to remember is that there are two categories. One set of goods and agricultural goods are affected a lot by what happens internationally, but another set is not affected or affected to a lesser extent. And therefore, when you think demand supply to your students, draw demand supply there without an international market, but here draw demand supply with an international market. And this is something that I think could be a useful teaching device as well. Sorry, Kapil, I'm making you go back and forth. Sorry about that. So that's the third success, the green revolution, the white revolution, this commodity. Now remember, the commodity price induced dynamism, basically, I don't think, there's a whole lot of credit that we get for ourselves. It's just that agricultural prices went up and, and obviously farmers responded and that's why they benefited. Now, in addition to these three successes, I would say we've also had isolated sectoral successes. For example, in Gujarat, we had BT cotton. In Maharashtra, we've had horticulture. West Bengal, people don't realize, we've had a potatoes revolution with, Lays and all those chips. In Bihar, we've had a maize revolution, which really increased maize production, especially in the late 2000s and early 2010s. We've had success in Madhya Pradesh in wheat because of higher prices and better procurement. And in UP, very recently, we've had a revolution in sugarcane because extraction rates of sugar, which are normally something like 9.2%, have gone up to 11.5, 11.6%. But these are all isolated successes. Others were, more broad-based successes. Then we've had greater resilience to droughts. I want you to show, if I can show that. You see, this is a chart, actual year-on-year growth in agriculture. You see how the volatility has come down. The chart speaks for itself, but the numbers also show that. So, for example, 60 to 88 growth 2.6, standard deviation 7. Here 2.9, standard deviation 4.6. And in the latest period, standard deviation has come down. So not only have we had some success in actual production, we've also had some success in reducing volatility in agriculture. Now, this is a chart that I kind of, again, it goes back to looking at, again, a teaching device like we did yesterday. So what this plots is the average shortfall of monsoon from the long period average, and this is the food grain production. Now, essentially, in a country which is fully irrigated, like the US, the weather should have virtually no impact. So the trend line, if you were not dependent on the monsoon, would be something like this. But we're not. We are dependent on this, and that's why the chart is upward sloping, which means that the more the rains you get, the more the production you have, right? Now, what is interesting is the following. 86 and 87, we had successive droughts. And notice where 87 is relative to the trend line. Similarly, in 14 and 15, we also had droughts, but remember 15 is much higher from the line than the 87 is from the line. So in a period where we've had a second year of bad monsoon, the shortfall in production has been less because actually, relative to the line, which measures what the average behavior is, this shows that normally, if it followed the line, 15 should have been somewhere here, but actually it's quite far away from that, or reasonably far away enough to show that the impact of the second successive drought was relatively muted, especially in the case of food grain. So we're getting a little bit more resilience, less variability in our agriculture. Yeah, that's plus is surplus.
The average shortfall?
Yes, it should be surplus, correct? Average should be surplus, correct. Negative is shortfall plus, very good point. Okay, so the basic challenge is so this is the crux of the matter, that we've not had very rapid agricultural productivity growth, and so the way to raise farm income on a substantial basis. Don't think today, yesterday, Maharashtra, UP, Madhya Pradesh, think long term. How do you raise farm income? The only known way to raise farm income or income anywhere is by raising productivity. Now you see, this is the level of agricultural productivity. I showed you what the growth was. You see labor productivity in agriculture, India, China, Brazil, we're still very, very far away. Because finally, remember, income is related to labor productivity. We're still very far from the frontier. And I can take you through each of the crops, whether it's rice, wheat, pulses. In all cases, basically, certainly relative to China, but relative to all frontier countries, our level of productivity is still quite low. Okay, now I'm going to come to land size if I have time later. We'll come to land size. It's, given timing, we may not have time to do that. But the other challenge is that while I showed you that our agriculture has become less volatile, I think we're still quite vulnerable, or at least relative to China and other countries. So here's that same chart that I showed you for India. I'm showing it to you for China as well. Notice how up to about 1990, the red squiggles as much as the blue does. The blue and the red squiggle as much. And then what happens? Essentially what happens is that look at how the blue stabilizes over time, but the red is still quite squiggly. And you see that in the charts. So you see, for example, for the overall period, Chinese growth is 4.3, India is 2.9. But you look at the standard deviation of growth, the volatility, China 3.4, India 5.8. But in the most recent period, China has come down and India still remains quite high. So while we have increased our resilience to agriculture, we're still far away. And there's a reason for that. And that's this map. This map shows which parts of India are irrigated and which parts are not. And what you find is that in all those orange colored areas, India is still not irrigated. And essentially, and you can look at so this is a very important and interesting chart because it tells you basically our cereals are pretty much irrigated and do okay. The other crops, pulses, onions, etc., were still not fully irrigated. And in fact, what you see is large parts of non-cereal agriculture are still quite reliant on the monsoon, and rain-fed agriculture is quite high. So this is also going to be part of my evidence to say that we love some agriculture too much and some too little. Essentially, the Punjab, Haryana belt, also parts of Andhra Pradesh and so on, and Tamil Nadu, you have reasonable water. But in the heartland where we grow non-cereal crops, we still are rain dependent. And that's the reason why, partly why you still see volatility quite high in Indian agriculture. Okay, now here's, I think, so the basic challenge is how do you raise farm income? How do you protect farmers against risk? But both these objectives must now be achieved against a very, very different background. And that background is basically that all the resources, water, land, soil quality, atmosphere, are becoming scarcer and are going to be more challenged. We know about climate change. So I'll show you, for example, there's a chart on climate change. Several people have modeled it, including the United Nations. What this chart shows is what will be the impact on on agriculture around the world with climate change. This tells you what's going to happen to impact on agricultural output. And you see that India is amongst the very dark red countries, the greatest impact. And that's because, we are still monsoon dependent. We don't have enough water. Notice how China, notice how, the other thing that's interesting about this chart is there are parts of the world that are going to be favorably affected in agriculture by climate change. Including maybe parts of certainly Canada, the United States, parts of China, parts of Russia, Europe, could be positively affected by climate change because what was hitherto, where you couldn't cultivate, you can start cultivating. Notice Australia is going to be very badly affected as well, like we are, because they've had lots of forest fires. Sub-Saharan Africa as well, again, very dependent on rains. And of course, the Sahel belt in Africa will be brutally affected. So the challenge for Indian agriculture is getting worse. And remember, we've had at least 2-3 episodes in the last 3-4 years of either unseasonal rains or hailstorms or whatever that have changed, that are really posing threats. So that's one challenge, and I'm going to go in reverse order. Yeah? No, now the ozone layer is kind of filling up, so that's less of a problem. But good question. That's, huh? Percentage, yeah. So there are too many. See, the model. So the basic thing is both an increase in temperature and variability of temperature, both, and then disease, water, all of these feed back into agriculture. And these are very, very complicated models. These are model-based estimates. So the question is, the web link, the PDF to the, there's no... Okay. No. Oh, it's not available? In the PDF it's not. Okay, so we'll fix that. It's been updated today morning and it'll be there. But I just cited one study. I've seen 2-3 others. Broadly, it broadly says it. This is a chart by NASA. This is groundwater depletion around the world. Normally, skyscraper, good. Here, skyscraper, awful. Because it shows that essentially that, black is groundwater depletion, and you see the skyscrapers jutting mostly out of northern India. Punjab, Haryana, groundwater depletion is the highest in the world. One comparable thing is actually in California, in central California, where they grow a lot and they're facing huge water scarcity as well. But notice how India is quite off the charts and China is not as bad. So groundwater is getting depleted. This is a chart of India itself. What is the groundwater withdrawal as a percentage of recharge? You see that in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Rajasthan, it's 100%. I.e., it's not, basically water levels are falling and you're not getting recharge at all. Now, I don't want to go through all the, so we have, similarly you can say land is becoming scarcer in India because of population growth. I've shown you the water thing already, and I've shown you climate change. So, bottom line is that we export, we need to raise our incomes, productivity, we need to raise farm incomes, and we need to, oh, sorry, I wanted to, there's one thing, that's why I think I skipped a chart. This is about, so sorry, when I said agricultural productivity is low, the flip side of that is farm incomes. Because I said, remember, farm incomes are related to productivity. This is data, we did this in last year's survey. This is data based on the 2012-13 agricultural situation survey. Yeah, 12-13. What this shows is, what is median farm income state by state? What is the level of median? That is the median farmer in every state. What is the income? Notice how, Punjab is high, Haryana is reasonable, but if you see the red line basically shows that median farmer income in India is about 19,000 rupees per year. This is 19,000 farm income. So if you think about what it is, 19,000 per year means you divide by 12 is basically 1,500 a month or something like that. It does not pay to be a farmer in India. Agricultural productivity is very low. Of course, there's variability, but the basic median farm income is not very high, and that is the flip side of low agricultural productivity in India. So this is what I wanted to, and of course, we should see what the update is. So this is income from farming activity, Kapil, right? Net income from farming activity, and this is from the data, yeah.
Land holding size according to the land holding.
Yeah, we'll come to land holding later on. We'll come to land. No land holding questions. I want to come. Okay, question. Mike, please.
I think biggest challenge for Indian agriculture is the dependency on the agriculture. As you rightly said, the 49% is dependent on agriculture. So where we will, those will move out to the manufacturing sector is doing nothing. The service sector require a level of skill which is very costly to acquire because of this non-public funded education is very costly. So agriculture sector being low paid sector, their wards are not able to get good quality education. That's why they are not joining the service sector. So where the dependency load can be taken, neither to the manufacturing sector because it's not growing. Service sector is the employability requires some sort of skill which is very costly, which cannot be afforded by the farming community.
Okay.
And moreover, sir, the social unrest. All the farming community are demanding OBC reservation. That indicates that now they are fed up with the agriculture sector. They want employment elsewhere. And this is in a caste-conscious society. It is very, very saddened to see that Jats, Patidas, all these want to come in the OBC status. There must be some compelling reason, and I think the dependency on agriculture has to go down.
I think very astute and good observations about agriculture. I think what you're saying basically supports all these charts. I don't know anything about politics. I know nothing about the caste system. But I think what you're saying, I think, is essentially what you're saying is that these dry numbers, you can see it happening in India today. It's a very fair point. But let's kind of move on, unless there are really important questions. No observations. I think let's not have observations, please, for the moment. Let's no observations. Question to him. We'll have observation time later when all of you can. But remember, please remember again. I want to just remind you that we are not. I'm not trying to convince you. You're not trying to convince me. We're trying to see how we can convey this material to students. That's the focus we need to keep in mind. Yeah.
Sir, can we have something on price volatility?
I'll show you something on price volatility. I'll show it to you. We're going to show volatility of prices later on. Yeah. Okay. So the point is that also that essentially, despite being short of water, we actually export water. And how do we export water? Basically, we export water by exporting the goods, the agricultural commodities that are very intensive in water. There are numbers in the economic survey, and I was just reading that number which you see here. Essentially, every year we export something like 25 cubic kiloliters of water embedded in our crops, and that's essentially equivalent to meeting the water demand for about 1.3 crore people. If you compare how much India and China export and import water, you'll be shocked at the result. The ratio of exporting to importing water via imports and exports of agricultural goods is about 4 for India, relative exporting to importing, and for China it's something like 0.3. So this is going to add to the challenge of Indian agriculture. Now we come to the central hypothesis. What do we mean by loving some agriculture less and rest more? And essentially, I'm going to say that we love cereals and of course, there are two things that we love. One I'm going to talk about a lot with cereals, but there is another commodity that we love a lot, which should be loving less. Answer sugarcane, you get 60 out of 100. Sugarcane in Maharashtra is 100 out of 100. Sugarcane in UP and sugarcane is not. It's sugarcane in Maharashtra, which is where I think so you get 60 out of 100 if you don't mind. Okay, so we need agriculture less, and we need. So what do we mean by that? So if you look at this is a thing from The Economist magazine. And you see what kind of interventions we do in agriculture, especially for cereals. We have minimum farm gate prices, we have consumer subsidies, we have export restrictions, very important. We have government stockpiling. So on this chart, India is about, intervening quite a lot in support of agriculture, So we've discussed what kinds of subsidies we provide. We provide minimum support prices, we provide fertilizer subsidies, electricity subsidies, water subsidies, and remember, agricultural income is non-taxable. So that's a kind of support we do. And of course, we provide periodic loan waivers, which is also a form of support to agriculture. Now remember, I am not going to say good, bad, right, wrong, etc., etc. I'm just stating the facts. Okay, these are the facts and this. Now, what is interesting is that if you take, and of course, agricultural credit. The next chart. So in addition, we also provide subsidized agricultural credit. And here's something that's very interesting. I don't know why. Okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. No, we'll come back to that chart. Remind me to come back to that chart later. The sequencing is. So here's an example of not only is this loving some less manifested in all these interventions, the main form in which it manifests itself is, of course, that we have, when we grant, we actually give minimum support prices for I think 21 or 22 crops. But it is only in cereals and wheat, and even that in parts of northern India where procurement is effective. So if you give minimum support price and you can't buy at that minimum support price, then it takes away the value of the minimum support price. And what you find here is that this shows, paddy and wheat is where are you most procuring it from? Red and orange. You see that Punjab, Haryana, and parts of, that I think is rice in Chhattisgarh, right? Rice in Chhattisgarh there. But basically, it's paddy and wheat where we're procuring that, and even that in some parts. Here's a very interesting support for that. They do these farmer surveys and ask them, are you aware about MSP? And it turns out that the awareness is mostly in paddy and wheat, and mostly even within paddy and wheat, the awareness of MSP is mostly in Punjab, Delhi, Chhattisgarh, where we actually, we're doing it. In the rest of the country, there's, and look at, for example, pulses, even the overall awareness is actually quite low. Sugarcane also not bad, because remember, in sugarcane, remember how procurement happens in sugarcane. Basically, it happens because mills are forced to buy from the farms. So that's why, the FRP that we announced for sugarcane has resonance for people, because we actually do that. So these are all examples of going to support the claim that we love some agriculture too much. Now hold me to that too much. I've not given you evidence yet for the too much. Here it says we're giving it a lot of support, but who am I? You have to say, who are you, sir, to say it's too much, right? A farmer in Punjab or Haryana can say, what do you mean by too much, right? So here's, I've shown you this. Oh, why am I going the wrong direction? Okay, there's a second dimension to this loving too much, which is that we not just love some cereals, but we also tend to love the large farmer more than the small farmer. And what is the evidence for that? Exhibit number 1. Remember what I said yesterday about the middle class subsidy, right? That to benefit from a tax subsidy, you have to be rich enough to be a taxpayer. Otherwise, you don't benefit from the subsidy. So essentially, by exempting agricultural income from tax, it clearly favors those farmers with large incomes. Second, we saw yesterday only about 1/3 of the total fertilizer subsidy goes to small and marginal farmers. On agricultural credit, and this is what the slide I ran away from earlier, which I want to show to you, is that we now have more and more evidence showing that we have, for example, priority sector lending for agriculture. It's also given at concessional rates. What we find more and more is that it's not obvious who these agricultural loans are reaching. So the study, which all of you should look at, is that basically if you look at the data, you can actually look at where is the loan being given by geographical location. Now, surprise, surprise, a lot of this loan is given to areas outside Mumbai and Delhi. Now, Delhi may be, but they've drilled it fine enough to say that these cannot really be, people doing agriculture very seriously. And also, if you look at the timing of this credit, it's very interesting. Normally, agricultural credit should surge, related to just before and during the harvest season. And here you find that the timing is kind of off. So you get, the point here is that even the cheap credit that we give, it may not be obvious that a lot of it reaches the smaller farmer. So, how do we favor the large? The exemption, the fertilizer subsidy, the agricultural credit. And if you look at power subsidy, for example, look at the power subsidy, the bottom quintile received about 10% of the total power subsidy, top quintile about 37%. We know that is almost by definition is going to be true because large farms are going to consume a disproportionate share of power. Now, so now I can open the floor to questions. Yeah, my friend has been itching to go. No observations. Question.
Sir, one question regarding, is there a need for taxing this agricultural income? Because on, I think in April 29 you have, like, in one conference you have mentioned that there is a need for taxing the rich farmers. So what is your comments on that?
May I humbly request today that you ask me facts, not opinions. So I've put up the fact. I've said it favors large farmers and doesn't favor the small. You should draw the implication. You should not ask me that question. You should not even ask me that question because I've given you the fact and I've given you whatever follows from that fact as well. Yeah, question. Today you're going to come afterwards in the line. Yeah, please.
So the production of paddy and wheat is increasing, but if we do an international comparison, our production is much more lower compared to other countries, and the usage of water for growing these paddy and wheat is much more higher compared to the international scenario. Do you think that our social incentive should be involved, taking into consideration of MSP rather than just giving MSP to crops which consume more water?
Lovely, very good question. I am in fact today going to, for the first time in this class, take you through an Excel spreadsheet precisely to make that point, and I want you to take this Excel sheet back to your students and use it, but it's going to address precisely that question. It's a very, very good question. Yeah, my friends in the north. Oh, my friend, you're going to make some no comment, my friend. Question.
Sure, sir. Actually, sir, since you are specializing in the area of trade, also you have highlighted many things. So in this context, I wanted to know one thing. It's related to immersion growth rate, as the term coined by Professor Jagdish Bhagwati. So basically, the nexus between the trade-off between price and productivity, you have also highlighted, right? So in this context, I wanted to know that since there is a trade-off, so then what are the alternatives so that we can protect both the things together?
Okay, firstly, I have a simple answer to this question, and then I'm told we have to take today no more than a 10-minute break because we have to. But let me answer. See, remember, immeasurizing growth in the terms that Professor Bhagwati argued only arises for a large economy. For a small open economy, it doesn't arise because remember, if you grow rapidly, China is not a small open economy because China, if it produces a lot of manufactures, it exports a lot, world prices of exports come down. India is not a big producer either of agriculture, maybe in rice. In rice, maybe it's a word, it can affect the world terms of trade. But for most small open economies, including India, our growth is not going to affect the terms of trade. Therefore, there's no question of immeasurizing growth even happening. I'm told we have to take a break now urgently. So why don't we come back and so you'll be the first to get a 1, 2 questions, 3 questions, 4 questions, 5 questions, but after tea. Thank you.